as long as the load is followed by recovery, and you eventually have a linear progression over time. And so the 1 step back, 2 step forward, 1 step back, 2 step forward, as long as the recovery comes after the load and you're getting appropriate recovery, you're fine, right? This is exactly what we need in order to get bigger, faster, stronger, and more resistant. And this is coming into the general adaptation syndrome. And like I said, we'll talk way more about this in the next unit when we look at adaptations to training. But basically you have homeostasis, you have some set of stress, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, thermal, environmental, and your body then is depleted of resources. And that's the load. Then as long as you have enough recovery, you get into the resistance phase and your body is recuperated and then some. And then if you're not exposed to that stress again, your body goes back down to homeostasis. And let's say you were injured and you're out for a while, you actually decrease your homeostasis. But as we'll talk about in the next module, and we'll look here is that you can see that your work capacity here, this dashed line, this actually gets higher each time. And as long as you time it perfectly or time it appropriately, where you have a load, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, and then you do a load again, and then 1 step back, 2 steps forward, a load, you'll get more tolerant of stress as time goes on. And then when you get way over here, like 1 year into your training, now testosterone has a more positive effect. Cortisol has less of a negative effect. Insulin is optimized and your body's not producing as much of it. And your obese adipocytes have turned more back into lean adipocytes, and your hunger is regulated better, and your body's able to adjust into ketogenesis and use ketones for fuel and sugar, and so things become better. And people always misconstrue that you lose fat or lose weight to get healthy, and really it's opposite. You actually get healthy and you end up losing weight because your systems are normalized. And we look at our hormonal output here. And this graph is really cool because it kind of shows you that over a 24-hour or 48-hour period. And we looked at, in the last unit, we looked at EPOC, the exercise post-oxygen consumption, looking at the replenishment of the oxygen debt that you created. But it's basically driven by hormones, right? When you look at your exercise period here for high-intensity exercise, you can see that growth hormone, the one that is the granddaddy for preserving lean body mass and mobilizing fat, that's your primary stress response. But you can see very soon if that stress is long-term, it is overshadowed, it drops down to near nothing, and your cortisol ends up being the dominant hormone. And if you could time it perfectly where you stopped like right about here, you could ride your growth hormone wave out where cortisol is down low. And so understanding how the hormones respond and how things are going, this drives the basis for how you schedule exercise. Are you doing 90-minute training sessions, or are you doing 15-minute training sessions? Are you doing high intensity with short rest breaks, or are you spending 90 minutes in the gym with like 2 to 3 minute rest breaks in between? Well, you're probably not doing anything except for increasing cortisol, and you're not really getting the growth hormone response that you want, or maximizing testosterone. So remember this graph here, this is the percent energy being used, and it's showing that at higher intensity activities you're using glycogen for fuel. So guess what? You need hormones that are going to break down glycogen into sugar. And way out here, you're using fat for fuel. Well, that's because your body is producing hormones that are breaking fat for fuel. And you have hormones here that are helping with the creatine. So you have chemical messengers all over the place that are helping to produce substrate. Well, if you took this graph here and you superimposed here at the glycolytic system, you are using sugar for fuel. This is because you are doing activity that you can only do for 30 to 40 seconds at a time. So this is really high intensity activity. And you're using a little bit of fat here. If you can take this and superimpose your hormonal response and look at your high intensity activity here. And so you can see testosterone has that peak like post workout 30, 45 minutes in, and then it kind of goes back down. And as I showed earlier, you can look at the different effects that your primary stress response is your body needs to produce more sugar for fuel. So you need energy, right? Exercise is a stress. It's a sympathetic driven mechanism. It's how you stimulate the sympathetic system, right? You create a hypoglycemic, a high energy, low oxygen environment where your body has to shift to a higher fuel source. And that shift is a stressful response, and you are taking advantage. Your epinephrine levels are up, your adrenals are up. And what happens initially, the first hormone out the gate here is growth hormone. You can see that it spikes right away. It's like a fire hose. It's squirting out like crazy. But as fast as it rises, it drops down just as fast. And you can see here that cortisol, it also is starting to become released as time goes on, but it's a little slower start, and it's kind of ramping up, and then boom, it hits this trajectory where it becomes the dominant hormone for prolonged activity. And like I said, when you get into exercise that's like longer than 2 hours, 2.5 hours, cortisol is a dominant hormone, and it's breaking down amino acids, breaking down fat. So if your workouts are less than 60 minutes, you're not really at risk of breaking down any protein for fuel. But if your goal is fat loss, you're going to want to stop exercise like about 15 or 20 minutes in. And this is the beauty or the success of CrossFit, is that they've done these super high intensity, like 90-95% max intervals, high intensity type stuff. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you're just forcing the body to burn through sugar as quickly as possible. And that's creating a extreme testosterone and growth hormone because you're using big muscle groups, right? I don't think there's a lot of CrossFit activities that are doing single curls or toe raises or lateral raises. They're doing like Olympic lifts and squats and deadlifts and push-ups, and they're also doing high intensities, like do this for 60 seconds and do it to failure, right? So if you're doing 60 seconds and you're doing it to failure, well, look at you, you're glycolytic, right? A lot of times you're doing 10 reps to failure or 5 reps to failure. You're linking them together so either way, you're rapidly burning through a lot of energy as quickly as possible. You're draining the glycolytic system, the stored glycogen, so you're increasing reservoir. You're making yourself super hypersensitive to insulin and glucose, and growth hormone is the dominant hormone. And then you stop, right? CrossFit workouts don't last for longer than 30 minutes, and so now you ride that wave out. And so again, this may or may not be their intention, but it's what's happening. You're getting this. So then you get places like Orange Theory Fitness that kind of had this similar aspect. They're trying to have you do high intensity exercise, but they're having you do it for like 45 to 90 minutes, and that's not scientific. If they were stopping, if Orange Theory had it like where you're doing for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, boy, that would be the secret sauce right there. But again, if your goal is optimizing fat loss, you're right there. Now, if your goal is muscle gain, you might want to get more of that testosterone release, or maybe later on. But working out for 90 minutes, an hour at a time, 2 hours, I meant to say 100 minutes, it's way too long. Again, this is the loading aspect of it. Don't forget we also have the recovery, and recovery is huge in terms of sleep is the number one aspect for maximizing parasympathetic and growth hormone production. Nutrition, in terms of manipulating your environment so that you can get into ketogenesis and that you're keeping insulin levels under control, your mental and psychological state, and your injury, which like you can't help but getting injury from acute injury, but we're looking more at chronic. So are you in a pro-inflammatory state? Are you taking things, eating things, doing things that are pro-inflammatory where you should be in an anti-inflammatory, looking at chronic injury, not acute? And so these are all things that we talk about in the future, but just realize that it's not just how you manipulate exercise. That's the load aspect, that recovery is just as important.